All right, we're coming to the long-awaited third session. And we've titled it, Should Christians Support Israel Today? And some Christians answer with an emphatic yes, while other Christians believe that Israel has no biblical right or any future to the land or anything else because Israel broke covenant, and we should not treat them different from any other nation. These Christians insist that since Messiah came and was rejected by the nation of Israel, God is doing a new thing through the church instead. They would add that in the church, God broke down the barrier of the dividing wall. That's Ephesians chapter 2, between nations and races and ethnicity, and removed the distinction between Jews and Gentiles. Therefore, the church is the new Israel. Now, this statement is called replacement theology, successionism. Now, how does Yahweh God's statement to Abraham's descendants, I will bless those who bless you, relate to us today? Well, it's a very current issue. In fact, in the United States of America, we have struggled with our relationship with Israel to the point where we've come up with something called the two-state solution. Started apparently with Bill Clinton. George W. reaffirmed what is called the two-state solution. American President Barack Obama, in his United Nations speech, reaffirmed this view for Israel and the Palestinians. And we provide a map in your notes there of Israel and kind of what that would look like. It sort of looks like the resolution after the 1967 war. In other words, everything on the map that is tan was conquered by Israel in the 1967 war, including the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and the Sinai Peninsula. It all belonged to Israel because of that war. But Israel graciously gave it all back. And so that land then has been debate, as well as within Jerusalem. You've probably noticed that in the news as well. But whatever the current viewpoints are, here, page 34, on whether Israel should be in the land or not, the Bible makes the Abrahamic promise to Israel unconditional. Does that sound familiar by now? I hope so. Page 35. So we have a biblical issue. Of course, if we don't have a biblical issue, I need to shut up and sit down. But in the Abrahamic Covenant, this line becomes really important at verse 3. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, Israel, I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Now, it's pretty clear to me, anyway, that this is a promise from God. God says that the one who curses Israel would be cursed by God, and Israel's unbelief hasn't nullified this. So we have to be very careful. This covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and David has no condition. Again, they disobeyed God over and over and over in the wilderness in the Old Testament, yet God blessed the nation. And those who tried to curse Israel in the Bible couldn't do it. At least they were blasted by God for doing it. So what I'd like to do is uncover for us the danger that we have. It's the third waterfall. Failure to support Israel today puts the Christian today on dangerous ground with God. Because lack of support for Israel can easily slip into something we call anti-Semitism. So I want to trace this and look at it, but before we do, let's define what we mean. What is anti-Semitism? This is at the bottom of your page 35. It means against the Semites. The difficulty there is there were Semites other than Abraham, and I think I saw a question on this, but I'm sorry I didn't get to it. I couldn't find it again or something. But yes, there are more physical descendants of Abraham than just through the line of the promise. Obviously, Ishmael was one, right? Esau was one, eventually the Edomites, and so on and so on and so on down through history. So, anti-Semitism refers to prejudice or discrimination against the Jews of the true line, as individuals and as a group. It tends to be racist, toward the Jewish state of Israel. Now, there's some other names for this: anti-Israel, Judeophobia. That might even be a better term. History is full of hatred of the Jewish people, Jacob, starting with his brother Esau, all the way through the history of the Holocaust to this day in 2017. And today, we are going to trace it. And your notes are full because I don't want you walking away with the wrong impression about anything that we're trying to say. Well, first of all, it's the oldest hatred. It's often called that. Oldest hatred as well as the longest hatred. Judeophobia is strikingly universal in this world. It exists in almost every country on the earth, regardless of whether it had Jewish inhabitants or how many they numbered. Page 36. It's deeper, negative, and notice that in 1913, the Anti-Defamation League was founded. Why? It was designed to stop, by appeals to reason and conscience, and if necessary to law, the defamation of the Jewish people. So the ADL basically was formed to stop Judeophobia in the world, or especially in the United States, but all over the world. Now, the ADL has taken this a little bit too far on occasion, and has been accused of some people of conflating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. And you don't want to make that mistake. Criticism of Israel is fine. Have to watch out about the attitude and the lack of support. So a need for balance is recognized before we ever begin. But let's trace the biblical history. Does the Bible teach this? And before we do, I want you to understand something. When God chooses a people, Satan is going to fight it. Let me say that again. Whatever God is trying to do in the world, Satan is going to try to stop it every which way he can. It's called anti-Semitism through the history of the world. For example, at the birth of the nation out of Egypt, Pharaoh, terrible attitudes. How about Balaam, the prophet in Israel, when King Balak asked Balaam to curse Israel in Numbers 22 to 24? And why were they in this situation? Because Israel had sinned, and God had sent the Midianites to cause them all manner of trouble. And so kind of as a sidebar over here in Numbers 22 to 24, Balak is asking Balaam to curse Israel, and so that's what it traces in those chapters, the attempt to do this. By the time Balaam was done, because God sovereignly guarded Israel, in Numbers 24:9, Balaam utters God's words about the physical descendants of the nation of Israel. Quote, Israel couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who dares rouse him? Blessed is everyone who blesses you, Israel, and cursed is everyone who curses you. And a couple of times, Balak the king heard this, and he slaps his hands and he says, I told you to curse them. And Balaam says, how can I? God told me to bless them. Are you with me? Important story there in Numbers. How about Sennacherib, king of Assyria? I mean, he carted Israel away, right? 722. Well, 2 Chronicles 32, he taunted the God of Israel. That's a mistake. And so the whole Assyria army was killed by God. And he was humbled by God. And then take the Edomites. Wow. I mean, if you look at the selected history, the Edomites, Descendants of Esau, Israel's twin brother. It's Edomites. It's Edom, Edomites, Esau, Mount Seir, all the same thing. And what judgment came from God? In fact, if you look down under that, I say the whole book of Obadiah, which amounts to one chapter. But the whole book is against the Edomites, the descendants of Esau. Why? They treated Israel horribly. Now, are you with me? I mean, sometimes God sends nations to treat Israel horribly. Over and over to discipline Israel. He sends the nations. Then what happens? Have you noticed in history? Then God turns on them for treating Israel so horribly. That's how serious this is. Now, Ezekiel 35, the whole chapter is basically one thing. I will curse those who curse you. Let's just look at a little of it. The word of the Lord came to me, Ezekiel, son of man, set your face against Edom. Prophesy against it and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Mount Seir. I will stretch out my hand against you and make you a desolate waste. I will turn your towns into ruins and you will be desolate. Then you will know that I am the Lord, because you harbored an ancient hostility and delivered the Israelites over to the sword at the time of their calamity. The time of their punishment reached its climax. Therefore, as surely as I live, Edom, I'm going to give you over to bloodshed, and it will pursue you. Since you did not hate bloodshed, bloodshed will pursue you. I will make Mount Seir, Edomites, a desolate waste, and cut off from it all who come and go. I will fill your mountains with the slain, killed by, it just goes on and on. Verse 10, because you have said, these two nations, that'd be Israel and Judah, these two nations and countries will be ours. In other words, as soon as Israel's having a tough time, the neighbor, Edom, is going, oh boy, they're about to go down and we can take over their land. Does that sound familiar? That was the mistake of the Edomites. Now, page 37. How about Haman in the book of Esther? He planned genocide against the Jews. By the way, where were the Jews at that time? Exile in Babylon, or with Xerxes, wherever he was. Okay, so they're in exile. Why are they there? They'd been disobedient, and God was judging them. While they're there, Haman says, let's exterminate them. Now, how did God feel about that? Clearly, it's quite a story, isn't it, with Esther? And, the gallows prepared for Mordecai. Who ended up on him? Haman. Remember this, men and women? This is an individual in a foreign land who made a statement about Israel and the Jews. And he ends up to be the one hanged on the gallows he had prepared for a Jew. That's how God feels. Let's go on, page 37, to Nehemiah. Eventually they came back from Babylon, right? What they find as they try to rebuild the walls? Enemies trying to prevent them from rebuilding the walls. By the way, anytime Israel tries to rebuild or build up anything, there's going to be opposition, and it's satanic every time. In this case, two names stand out: Sanballat and Tobiah. And boy, howdy, did they cause problems. Did the wall get rebuilt? How's that even possible? Sovereign God watching out for his people. How about the days of the Syrian Antiochus Epiphanes, 175 BC? His whole action was predicted by Daniel in Daniel chapter 8. Not by Daniel, but by God through Daniel. Daniel chapter 8, verses 9 through 14. and it was fulfilled by the Maccabean revolt and the Feast of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. Now, we could go to other selected vectors of Judeophobia in history since the coming of Israel's Messiah in his first advent. Glenn Beck has an interesting video, but it's old now. So here's what I'd like to do. I would like to add something that's not in your notes, but I want to put it there. Did you realize that this past Tuesday was Protestant Reformation Day? Yeah, 500 years. Anniversary of the day that Martin Luther is said to have nailed his 95 Theses on the door in Wittenberg, Germany, October 31, 1517. He was, this time, of course, was identified by Protestants, by us as Protestants, as the beginning of the Reformation, a way that needed to take place away from the Catholic Church and Catholic doctrine. And there was 4 or 5 solas, and ones I remember: sola fide, sola scriptura. If it's only by faith, it's only the Bible. I think another one was only Jesus. I think those are good onlys to hang on to, by the way. But here's what you need to understand about Martin Luther. 28 years later, he wrote a booklet called The Jews and Their Lies. He wrote it in 1545. And sadly, Hitler and the Nazi regime in Germany found it, and they began to disseminate it, Martin Luther's booklet, because it was so anti-Jew. Now, why was it so anti-Jew? By the way, I got it this past week, and I was reading through it. And why did he come across so anti-Jew? Why did it even happen? Answer: Martin Luther he worked to reach the Jews till he ran out of gas. Eventually he became so tired of the antagonism toward the gospel of Jesus Christ, which Paul experienced over and over in Acts. But Luther got so tired of it that he wrote this pamphlet for Christians, and he said, watch out for the Jews. They're trying to take over our country. They're trying to, they take money from us. They extort money from us. And he had some examples from his current society there in Germany. I mean, he just turned and he became vitriolic in his opposition to the Jews, and it came out, unfortunately, it was in print, sort of like Facebook today, you got to watch out. So anyway, he put it in print, and as a result, the Nazis picked it up. Wow. And as I looked at this whole thing, and tied it to what Paul experienced in Acts, I thought, in most every case for Paul, the Jews not only rejected the idea that Jesus was the Messiah, they began to persecute Paul too and harass him. Sometimes they drove him out of their city. So that Paul's statement in Romans 11:28 that we looked at, they're disobedient to the gospel, they are opposed to the gospel, kind of an understatement. But Luther eventually was so upset at the Jews in Germany, the Jews that were in his home country, that he thought God's judgment on them is justified. And Luther took it on himself to warn fellow Christians of their deplorable condition. But Luther went too far. Luther eventually made it sound as though Jews were totally rejected by God and would never return to favor with him. And that error was something that the Apostle Paul never made, as he made clear in Romans 9 through 11. But this error on Luther's part was exploited then by Hitler. So, dear church, be careful. Especially if you go into print or onto video. We've got to be careful what we say. Very careful. Now, most infamous then is, nearly 400 years later, Protestant Reformation in Germany was led by men who believed that God was done with Israel. That's the net result. And so where was the church in Germany during the Holocaust? Watching on the sidelines. Who cares? God's done with this group of people. They're getting what they deserve. Now I probably would have been on the bank of the river going, wait, God is not done with Israel. But did anybody listen? No, apparently not. Church was like a non-factor, and the Holocaust was the result. Who are they? Martin Luther, John Calvin, other great reformers. And these men are cited to this very day in our churches as the historical justification for the current movement in America, which heads toward replacement theology. Now, we could go on, and I do here on page 37, to Iran. 2012, President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, how you say his name, was a bad dude. He wanted to take Israel and shove them into the sea. Remember that? We give you some sources there. Iran's supreme leader, Khomeini, called for death to America on Saturday, March 2015, a day after President Barack Obama appealed to Iran to seize the historic opportunity for a nuclear deal and a better future, as the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry claimed substantial progress toward an accord, and they were very, very happy. And so was Khomeini. And so was everybody who's casual toward Israel and the Jews. Another group at the bottom, page 37, Muslim Brotherhood. Or how about this one? You ever heard of these names? Al-Qaeda, Taliban, ISIS, Hezbollah, Hamas. They have similar goals. In fact, back in 2014, Netanyahu's key line in the UN was, so when it comes to their ultimate goals, Hamas is ISIS and ISIS is Hamas. He also included Boko Haram in Nigeria, another one in Somalia, Hezbollah, another one in Syria, another one in Iraq, Al-Qaeda. Page 38. Here's an interesting fact. In 2013, fairly recent now, a BBC World Service Global Survey found that Israel was the fourth most negatively viewed nation in the world, after Iran, Pakistan, and North Korea. Wow, what company. In only one Western country, America, did a majority express favorable views. That majority, 51%. That's it. Half the nation in America now does not have favorable view of Israel. By the way, that has changed in my ministry lifetime. I've watched that boat going down the river too. There it goes. Woohoo, what's happening? Boy, what a shift in attitude toward Israel in America. Now, out of the European Union nations, Britain was found to have the most unfavorable view. Interesting, huh? 72% of Brits do not have a good idea about Israel. France, 63%. Poland, 44%. Isn't that interesting? Poland has a more favorable view. And that's where the Holocaust was centered. Interesting, isn't it? Hard to explain, but interesting. But let's get to 2017. Here we are. 2017 efforts at Judeophobia. Let's start with the United Nations. The United Nations' contempt for Israel is blatant, especially at a group or within the United Nations called UNESCO. And it was interesting, just recently it was announced by the current administration that they're pulling funding for and pulling out of UNESCO as of 2018. So the UN's hatred and contempt for Israel is just amazing. In fact, it's so obvious that it prompted all of the American U.S. senators, all 100 of them, to write a letter to the UN. Now look at this. Demanding that the world body end its, quote, anti-Israel agenda. I find this so refreshing. All 100 U.S. senators see it in the UN. The letter, authored by Marco Rubio and Christopher Coons, called on the leader of the UN to ensure that Israel is treated neither better nor worse than any other UN member in good standing. In other words, they're not even asking for special treatment for Israel. They're just saying, hoo-hoo, don't show bias against her. Further, the letter noted that too often the UN is exploited as a vehicle for targeting Israel rather than as a forum committed to advancing the lofty goals of its founder, which is more equality toward all abuses wherever we find it. Okay? Oh, man. I find that fact right there that the U.S. senators did that amazing. And I'm going, wow, we're not as bad off as I thought we might be. Oh, but then I ran into the BDS. The BDS stands for Boycott, Divest, and Sanction Israel. What? Yep. It's an anti-Semitic movement in America whose end goal is the destruction of the Jewish state. BDS activists have repeatedly acknowledged that, quote, the real aim of BDS is to bring down the state of Israel. Now, David Brog had the opportunity to appear before the Nevada State Legislature. And I'm going to give you just a little 3-minute snippet of what he had to say to the Nevada State Legislature.
Mr. Chairman, my name is David Brog. I'm here today as the Executive Director of the Las Vegas-based Maccabee Task Force, which was created to fight the movement to boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel. I'm also here as a member of the Board of Directors of Christians United for Israel, the largest pro-Israel organization in the United States, and one that has worked very hard on this legislation. I want to thank Lieutenant Governor Hutchison for all of his hard work and for his deep support for the state of Israel. It's something both of the organizations I represent deeply appreciate. The reason why we come out in support of SB 26 is because the BDS movement is fundamentally an anti-Semitic movement and one that endangers peace in the Middle East. I want to be clear. It is not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. Israel is a country of men. It is a fallible country. Mistakes are made every day. And I'll tell you who's in the front of the line of criticizing Israeli policies: the Israelis. But it is anti-Semitic to criticize only Israel. When the only pain and suffering and injustice in the world that people focus on, speak out about, act on, is pain, suffering, and injustice they somehow can blame on the Jewish state and no other, they have a problematic obsession with Israel. People who see no good in the state of Israel and no evil beyond its borders are bigots, pure and simple. The BDS movement is a movement that criticizes only Israel. They scan the globe, but they don't see genocide and massacres in Sudan or Syria or Chechnya. They don't see the persecution of gays and women in Saudi Arabia or Iran. And they don't seem to care very much about the persecution of Christians in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, or Pakistan. They single out Israel. They single out Israel, the only country in the Middle East where gays can live openly and safely, where women are not only permitted to drive cars, but they pilot fighter jets. They single out Israel, the only country in the Middle East where the Christian population isn't persecuted and shrinking, it is thriving and growing. They single out Israel, the only country in the Middle East, where Arab citizens are free to vote for, serve in, and criticize their government without having to fear for their lives or their freedom. They single out Israel, the only country in the Middle East where Muslim citizens are free to worship Allah as they see fit or not worship Allah at all, according to their conscience.
Aren't you glad that there's somebody in America that's representing Israel this way in the legislatures and, frankly, addressing BDS? What a horrific movement. I had not heard of it until I was doing my study in preparation of our time today. But, things are changing in America, and not for the better in that way. All right, so page 38, what's our conclusion from history, both ancient and the most recent history here and even in America? What do we learn from history? Anybody who opposes Israel became God's enemy. Even when Israel was disobedient. Don't miss this lesson. Now, I make a statement here at the bottom of page 38 that was made by David Brog. That judging anti-Semitism as wrong is mistakenly thought to come from a belief that Israel can do no wrong. No, that's not true. The nation of Israel keeps doing wrong. I hope you understand that. To this very day, they're still sinning. They're still doing wrong. And we still should not curse the nation. Why not? Because of God's warning in the Abrahamic Covenant. When he says, I will bless those who bless you, Israel, and I will curse those who curse you. I didn't say that. Remember that from our time today. That's just right out of the Abrahamic, that's out of the mouth of God himself. And dare I say, it's a promise. And God always keeps his promises. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. And it applies even though Israel rejected Jesus as the Messiah. So page 39. We move from history now to the future. Because this is a prophecy time together. And we turn our attention, what happens in future days? Well, the world surrounding Israel, it says in Ezekiel 38, will be allied against the nation of Israel in the future. In fact, he was against the nations of Gog, Magog, Meshach, Tubal, and other nations. Skip down to Ezekiel 38, 1-6. Let's read it. And the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel, saying, Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, Tubal, and prophesy against him and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal. I will turn you about and put hooks in your jaws, and I'll bring you out, all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them splendidly attired, a great company with buckler and shield, all of them wielding swords, along with your allies, Persia, Ethiopia, Put, Gomer with all its troops, Beth Togarmah from the remotest parts of the north. And when God says he's going to bring them out, and what is he talking about? Hooks in your jaws. Basically, through some demons, God gathers all these kings into the ultimate and final battle, the Battle of Armageddon. And you can read all about it in Revelation 16:14, and again in verse 16. Zechariah 12 through 4, 8 and 9. These locations are beginning already today, here in 2017. They're beginning to align themselves together against the nation of Israel. So what nations are prophesied by Ezekiel? I mean, these are kind of strange names in this passage. So the following observations that are to be credited to Joel Rosenberg, He's a very good man. Commend him to you and his blog and website and whatever else he writes. First of all, the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel gives us clues. So let's provide a map. Thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, O Gog. Where is that? Gog, Magog. It's Russia and the former Soviet republics. And number two, same thing, remote parts of the north. Now, you do understand that north in the Bible is always north of God's beautiful land, Israel, okay? It's not like Canada. Get that out of your mind. Nothing to do with Canada, okay? So it's north of Israel, okay? And remotest parts of the north would be Russia. And then notice it says Meshach, well, Magog is here, a couple maps there. Meshach and Tubal, which is basically all the coastlines of the Mediterranean, loosely interpreted on the map there. In Ezekiel 38:5, what do we have? We learn that the first ally, and listen to this now, the first ally Russia will have is Persia. Now, until 1935, of course, Persia was the legal name of the country you know today as Iran. So we know that Russia and Iran will build an alliance in the last days to attack Israel. And guess what? This past September 26th, 2017, Putin met with Turkey and Iran in Ankara to form an alliance. You know what I call that? Another rumpling in the curtain. Okay? Now, look what's next, number 5, there at the bottom of your page 39. Ezekiel tells us that another country in the alliance will be what many English Bibles translate as Ethiopia. The Hebrew word is Cush. And Cush, did I put it up there? No, I haven't. Persia, Ethiopia. All right. Now, fundamentally, where was I? While the current state of Ethiopia may be involved in the war, the focus is really Sudan, which has been a radical Islamic Sunni state closely allied with Iran and Russia and deeply anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. And then page 40. Next in the passage, Ezekiel mentions a nation called Put. Be part of that alliance. Josephus, in his writings, identifies Put as ancient Libyas, the territory we call Libya in Algeria today. Interestingly, both of these countries in 2017 are deeply hostile to Israel and closely allied with Russia. Number 7, Gomer and Beth Togarmah. Associated with countries from the remote part of the north. If you do a little detective work, one learns that Gomer is what we now call Turkey. Probably includes part of Turkey near the Syrian border. Oh boy, Syria, don't even bring that up today, right? I mean, what a mess is going on at that location, even as we speak. And then notice how it ends, Ezekiel 38:6b. And many peoples with you. So in other words, one thing to name all these locations, and it's another thing to understand the extent of this animosity toward Israel. They are surrounded with people who do not like them, do not want them to exist, want them wiped off the face of the map. Haven't we heard all that in the news? Hasn't all that been said about them? Fundamentally, you're watching this whole thing unfold, and as you do, you should be saying, yep, God, you know what? Your word is going to prove true again. Big surprise. I want to add Psalm 83. Did I put that in your notes? I don't think I did, actually. Do you have Psalm 83 at all in there? Is that a location? There should be a nice square there. Anyway, it's a psalm of Asaph. And listen to it, put in your margin, put Psalm 83 verses 6 and 7. And here's what's listed as opposing Israel in the future. Palestinians and South Jordanians, the Saudis, Palestinians and Central Jordanians, Egyptians, the North Lebanon and Hezbollah, the North Jordanians, Arabs of the Sinai, Hamas of the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah, and the Syrians and northern Iraqis. That's the list in Psalm 83. Wow. Does God's word know what's going to happen? Of course, every time. And since Israel became a nation in 1948, surrounding nations are not happy. That was like the worst thing that could happen as far as they're concerned. And so what are they doing about it? They're building up rhetoric, if not actual missiles, and firing them into Israel. And Israel has an amazing defense system called the Iron Dome, and most of them don't land. That doesn't stop the hostility. They're still shooting them, still firing them. They're still trying to kill Jews wherever they can find them. Now, you'll notice at page 40, we referenced the Bin Laden funeral. That's ancient history. Let's look at the 2017 Washington Post article. Here's what it said. Headline, Russia's Putin visits Turkey as ties between the nations deepen. Wow, okay. But that wasn't all. English El Arabia, online news, headline, Putin in Ankara to forge alliance of Russia, Turkey, and Iran. That was September 26th of this year. And my mouth just dropped open. I'm going, wow, if this thing isn't marching toward what God said and He predicted and promised would be the case. So what do we have? Look at this map. I mean, wow. Rosh, Magog, Togarmah, Gomer, Tubal, Persia, Ethiopia, Put, which is North Africa. I mean, they are surrounded. Have you ever wondered why so much attention is paid in the news to one of the smallest countries on the earth? That's because, they would hate to have this said to them. They're American news agencies. And America has always been pro-Israeli and based on Judeo-Christian values. We've actually had the Ten Commandments in the courtrooms, in rock and marble, which they took out. I'm telling you, the reason is God is there. His eye is on that location. And it is it is the epicenter as far as God is concerned. That's why I get so excited. I watch fake news, come on. And I'm listening to all their bias and everything, and then they focus in on the Middle East. And I say, you don't even know what you're doing now. Praise the Lord. You're giving God's country its due. Actually, I can hardly watch the news anymore. But anyway, page 41 of your notes. Another map just to show it and highlight it. Israel is surrounded by Muslim countries that have been against Israel existing as a nation. And even today, Israel is surrounded by enemy nations. All right, I think we're ready to bring this bird in for a landing. On the bottom of page 41, conclusion then. Doesn't matter, you're looking at the biblical evidence of history, and then we look at the biblical prophecies, and they all say the same thing. God is against any nation that is against the nation of Israel. They end up becoming enemies of God Himself. Not a good thing to be. So should Christians support Israel today? Well, you have your choice. You want to be an enemy of God or you want to be blessed by God? And you thought Israel didn't matter. See, God's people should encourage supporting Israel today, in contrast to Luther. Why? That's not because secular Israel is Christian, not even close. Certainly not because they're following the God of the Jews. They haven't repented in return. Nope. Well, then why? Only reason is found in the Bible. Principle is proven throughout history. I will bless those who bless you. Now, replacement theology, currently taught by some, and why are we surprised? Reformed groups from the Reformation, Lutheran groups, Martin Luther, Presbyterian groups are swayed by both, and more recently, some Baptist groups, and I list them in footnote C in the back. That kind of looseness toward Israel could send our churches today onto very dangerous ground. We could begin to think that God is done with the nation of Israel, failed to support them. At the very least, this teaching could lead to apathy, such as happened in Germany. Who cares? God is done with them. So anybody who's just coming and blasting the nation of Israel, who cares? It's no big deal. So how does Yahweh's statement, I will bless those who bless you, relate to us today? I'm asking you this. Do you believe the promise of God? Thank you. Because this is one of them, right? I will bless those who bless you, Israel, and I will curse those who curse you. You have to believe that. And if you want God's blessing for your family or your church or your nation, you know what to do because of the promise. Question is, what does that even look like? How do you go about, I'm behind again, how do you go about supporting the nation of Israel today? Okay, yes, we should do it. How do you do it? Ways to do it. I'm just giving you some suggestions, very practical, simple things like praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Doesn't the Bible tell us to do that? Pray for the peace. But by the way, when you're praying for the peace of Jerusalem, you know what else you're doing? You're praying the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Another thing you can do is recognize and teach that God still has a future for the nation of Israel because he will cleanse and redeem them. Yes, sir. That's what I'm doing here. And now you have the material in your hands. Go and do thou likewise. Okay? And you say, well, wait, how do I do this? Well, you know what? There's a video being done of these sessions. And we intend eventually to make it available. And we're going to take the booklet and put it into PDF form, make it available online. So you can go home to your church, put on the video, open up the book, it's available to you, you can print it off, and boom, you're off and rolling. And talk about how the guy in this video kept waving his arms, okay? Okay. Number 3, we should speak out our support for Israel to exist as a nation with Jerusalem as its capital. We look with favor on Christian organizations that express support for Israel as a nation. I tried to get Friends of Israel to come and represent themselves at our conference. They decided not to do that, but obviously I've mentioned their name. And they are one of the solid groups, Friends of Israel. Number 5, we strive to elect leaders that express support for the nation of Israel. You know what? If a candidate for an office, if I don't like him and he expresses support for the nation of Israel, I'm liable to vote for him anyway. That's how far I take it. All right. You can throw rocks later. Number 6. We should criticize any sin we see in Israel, certainly, and yet not criticize the nation from a foundation that says God is done with them. In fact, we're doing so well on time that what I'm going to do here is call your attention to B. In your end notes, what page is this, John? You didn't mark it because you didn't think you'd have time. Anyway, what is it? Page 44, 2 recent books address this issue. Okay, thank you. One by Gerald McDermott, The New Christian Zionism, Fresh Perspectives on Israel and the Land, came out in May. He was interviewed by Fred, and Fred asked, how should all this work out in terms of Christian attitude toward the nation of Israel? I grew up in a dispensational circle, by the way. People have wandered away from pre-trib, pre-mill. That's the way I would put it. They wandered away because it used to be in America the prevalent view. Are you with me? And he kind of admits it here. Fred does. So at least on the popular left, us thinking that we must support the nation of Israel unreservedly. But that's not what you're saying, is it, Gerald? And McDermott says, right. If the state of Israel does things which are not right, and of course every state does things that are not right. I mean, look at our own country. We shouldn't support policies or decisions that are not righteous. However, we need also to realize, particularly at this critical moment in the history of redemption and the history of secular politics, that the state of Israel today is the only democracy in the whole Middle East that allows political freedom to oppose it, speak up against it, and not be thrown in jail. Didn't David Brog bring out something similar in his defense before the Nevada legislature? And so for simply prudential and pragmatic reasons, we ought to support this tiny little state that is a light, a democracy that is a light to the nations. That's the way he looks. Another one that I mentioned there is Stand with Israel. Mike Evans, I think, is the author of that one. Anyway, so I wanted to point out that there needs to be a balance in our mind there, not to just carte blanche, anything Israel does is fine. Number 7, back in your notes, I think page 42, we should avoid discouraging support for Israel. How do we discourage? Sometimes by the things we say, actions, attitudes, even though the nation does not believe. We should avoid that. We find ways instead to strengthen the church in Israel and in Palestine and lift up Moses' hands through prayer. The Palestinian pastors at that conference down in Southern California, that's one of the pastors. He came out and he said, we need prayer, just like Moses. And his hands, as long as his hands were up, they were winning. So, who was it? One on one side, Joshua? No, not Joshua. One on one side, Aaron, maybe? And Aaron and Hur, thank you. So, they propped his hands up. And that's what we need to be about. Find people who pray for Israel and prop their hands up. You need to pray as an individual. Find groups that pray. All right, number 9. We find ways to share the pure gospel with the Jews everywhere, but especially in the Middle East. Joel at that conference said the best way to bless Israel is with Yeshua. And he's right. Okay, wow. Preacher's done early twice in the same day. I can't believe. Okay, so fundamentally, we have arrived at another break. But let me tell you or talk to you about this last session. In the last session, from the 2011 Epicenter Conference with Joel Rosenberg, they did a panel. And I was so taken by what was said as being right on that I've chosen one of the DVD discs that I bought for you today for the 4th session.